Why humans can no longer understand animals. Listen. Lean in close and listen well, child. Do you hear it? The birds are calling from the acacia trees this very morning, a sharp, urgent cry that rises and falls like the tide of a river after the long rains. The frogs at the water's edge are speaking too, low and rhythmic, words folded inside their croaking throats. Even the wind, threading through the tall savanna grass, carries whispers that the reeds and the insects have placed there. The world is alive with voices. The world has never stopped speaking. But you do not understand a single word of it. None of us does. Not anymore. There was a time, child, long before your grandfather's grandfather drew his first breath, long before the first clay hut rose from the red earth of this land, when the boundary between human speech and animal speech did not exist. When a man could sit beneath an acacia tree and hear the weaver bird above him say, "The river rises to the east. Take the high path today." When a woman grinding grain at dusk could hear the mongoose in the grass whisper, "There is a serpent near the water jar. Step carefully." When a child, barely old enough to walk, could look into the deep amber eyes of a dog and understand perfectly the love that lived there. This was the world as the great Creator first willed it, a world of one tongue between all living things. A world where the lion did not merely roar and the elephant did not merely trumpet. They reasoned, they debated, they warned, they mourned, they sang, and every living soul around them understood. And so the forests were full of counsel. The plains were full of cooperation. The rivers carried conversations the way they carry pollen and soil, freely, generously, without pause. But that world is gone now. It vanished in a single night because of a single man. A once good man. A man who was once trusted. A man who, in the end, chose himself over everything sacred. And this, child, is that story. Sit still. Do not look away. For the animals are still telling it, every dawn, every dusk, and you deserve to know what they are saying. In those blessed days, the village of Amara sat at the meeting place of two rivers, where the land was rich and dark, where mangoes hung heavy as memories from their branches, and where the grasses grew so tall that a man standing in them could disappear entirely. Though he had no reason to hide, for there was no fear between species in those days. None at all. The people of Amara lived not above the animals nor below them, but beside them, in an arrangement of mutual respect so old that no elder could trace its beginning. The elephants warned the village when the great storms were approaching from the north, their rumbles traveling through the earth itself before the thunderclouds had even gathered. The birds, the weavers and the hornbills and the sharp-eyed starlings, mapped the movements of drought and flood and served as eyes for the farmers who could not see beyond the hills. The bees guided certain trusted humans to hidden places of sweetness, asking only that they leave enough behind. And the humans, in return, shared. They left food at the forest's edge. They did not take more from the land than the land could give. They called the animals by name. Not pet names invented in condescension, but true names, spirit names, names that the animals had carried since the first morning of the world. And when they spoke those names, the animals turned, for the names rang with recognition and dignity. The language they shared was not simply spoken words. It was a deep grammar of intent and feeling, a system of sound and gesture and stillness that all creatures understood. When the lion spoke, the earth itself seemed to arrange itself to listen. When the tortoise spoke, slowly and with great precision, even the rushing waters seemed to pause so that nothing might be missed. The children of Amara grew up bilingual in this way, fluent in human speech and animal speech both, the way a river is fluent in the language of both sky and stone. It was not considered extraordinary. It was simply the nature of things. The way the sun rises. The way the rain finds the earth. This was the gift. Whole and unbroken. This was the world before the fracture. And it was into this world that Kofi was born, Kofi, son of a farmer, grandson of a healer, a boy with eyes so alert that the owl acknowledged him as kin. By the time Kofi had reached the age of a man, when the shoulders broaden, and the voice drops to the lower registers of seriousness, he had already become what every village whispered he would become, the greatest hunter Amara had ever known. But do not misunderstand this. In those days, a great hunter was not simply a man who could kill. Any desperate person could stumble into violence. A great hunter was a man of understanding, a man who listened to the forest, who read the grammar of bent grass and displaced dew, who knew the routes of every animal not because he had trapped them but because they trusted him enough to walk those routes in his presence. Kofi had that gift in abundance. When he moved through the bush, the animals did not scatter. They watched him with recognition. The vervet monkeys tracked his passage from the canopy above, calling soft greetings in their sharp-syllabled language. The impala did not bolt. The wild dogs circled wide but did not raise an alarm. He had, since boyhood, maintained a particular friendship with a dog named Suru, a lean, amber-coated creature with one black ear and eyes the color of deep river water. Suru was not a domestic animal in the way we now think of dogs. He was a bridge creature, the elders said, born between the two worlds, loyal to both, belonging completely to neither. Suru moved at Kofi's heel with the gravity of a sworn companion. The animals of the forest gave Kofi their counsel freely. The elephant, old Adwoa, had once steered him away from a stretch of land that had swallowed 3 men before in a hidden sinkhole, calling out to him in the low bass of elephant speech, "Not there, Kofi. The ground does not hold." The parrot, a bright and sarcastic creature the village called Kent, had once warned Kofi that rival hunters from a distant settlement were positioned in the western grove, watching with spears tilted forward. Kofi gave back in kind. He shared meat. He repaired the riverbank where the otters built their lodges, carrying stone when the floods weakened the banks. He never hunted more than was needed. The village ate. The animals were respected. He was trusted. By both peoples. Completely. And there is no betrayal more devastating than one born inside complete trust. It was in the dry season of Kofi's 33rd year that the first crack appeared, not in Kofi himself, not yet, but in the world around him, which would press upon him until something gave way. The rains had failed. Not entirely, the land was not dead, but the season was thin and stretched, like old skin over tired bone. The rivers ran lower. The mango harvest was poor. The grain stores, which the village elders managed with careful rationing, were feeding fewer mouths than the population had grown to contain. Children's ribs showed through their skin like the bars of a cage, and the elders met each evening with faces creased in the particular worry of people who can see a bad ending approaching from a distance but have not yet found the path around it. It was in this season that 3 merchants arrived from the coast. They came with cloth and iron and glass beads, beautiful things, things that made the eyes of the village widen. But what they truly carried, tucked inside their ambitions, was something far more valuable to them, knowledge that ivory was selling at the coast for prices that could change a man's entire fate. They spoke to the village elders first, formally and politely, as custom demanded. The elders listened and refused. The forest was not theirs to deplete. The elephants were not theirs to sell. The merchants, however, were patient men. They understood that when doors are closed, there are often windows. And so, on the third evening of their stay, when the cooking fires had burnt low, and most of the village slept, the tallest of the merchants found Kofi sitting alone outside his hut, sharpening his spear by moonlight, listening, as Kofi always listened, to the night sounds of the forest. The merchant sat beside him. He did not speak of Ivory immediately. He spoke of Kofi's mother, who was ill, the whole village knew, and of the medicines available at the coast that could ease her suffering. He spoke of a future for Kofi's young daughter, who deserved better than thin seasons and an empty grain store. He spoke softly, warmly, as a man who understands suffering speaks to another man who is surrounded by it. Kofi listened. And something, small at first, faint as smoke before a flame, shifted in his chest. It began with water. Or rather, with what Kofi knew about water, knowledge that the animals had gifted him freely, in the spirit of shared survival, never imagining it could be weaponized. The forest to the north of Amara was vast and trackless to most human eyes. But Kofi, over the years, had learned its veins and arteries. He knew where the hidden springs bubbled up between granite boulders, fed by underground channels that even the oldest maps of the elders did not show. He knew where the permanent watering holes lay in the deeper forest, secret places that the elephants had revealed to him during the great drought of his youth, when old Adwoa had led him to water with her enormous, deliberate trust, saying in the slow rumble of elephant speech, "We share this with you because you have shown yourself worthy of sharing." The merchants wanted to know where the elephants drank, where they gathered, where they slept. Kofi refused at first. For 3 days, he refused. He walked the village perimeter at night. He spoke with Suru, who sat very still and watched him with those deep river water eyes and said nothing, because sometimes a dog's silence is a more powerful counsel than any speech. But on the 4th day, his mother cried out in pain that the village medicine could not quiet. And on the 4th night, the merchant placed in Kofi's hand a small wrapped bundle of coastal medicine that smelled of salt and strange herbs, and said, "There is more of this. Enough for a season. And enough iron and cloth to fill your grain stores twice over. Tell me only where the deep waters are." Kofi drew the map in the dust. Quickly, without ceremony, as if speed might reduce the weight of what he was doing. He drew 3 marks. 3 watering places, 3 gathering spots for the great herds. The merchant studied it, committed it to memory, then dragged his foot across the dust, erasing it. Kofi went inside to give his mother the medicine. He did not look at Suru. He could not. The dog sat by the door all night without moving, his amber eyes open and watching the darkness, as if he were keeping vigil over something that had already died. Kent the parrot had been watching from the fig tree that overhung the roof of Kofi's hut. Kent was always watching. That was the nature of parrots, they were the archivists of the forest, the creatures assigned by some ancient instinct to observe, record, and report. And Kent had seen the map drawn in the dust. Had seen the merchant's face by lamplight, studying every line of it. By the time the sun rose, Kent had already carried the news 3 ridges deep into the forest. In the language of birds, rapid and precise, built for distance, the message passed from the parrot to the hornbills, from the hornbills to the finches, from the finches to the doves that nested near the river's edge, and from the doves it fell into the ears of every creature that stopped to drink that morning. The elephant heard it first among the large animals. Old Adwoa stood still for a long time at the river's bend. So still that the smaller creatures edged away from her, uncertain of the silence. Then she lifted her head, breathed once, deeply, and said, "Begin moving the young ones." By midday, the watering hole to the north that Kofi had marked on his dust map was empty. The elephants had moved before the merchant scouts could arrive. But 3 hunters from the coast, thin, quick men with long rifles that the people of Amara had never seen before, found the second watering place by nightfall, and they waited there through the dark hours with a patience born of profit. At dawn, 3 young elephants died. The sound of it reached the village. Not the shots, those were too far. But the grief did. It moved through the ground the way elephant voices always travel, a subsonic tremor of mourning that the people of Amara felt in their feet and their chests without understanding its source. Old Adwoa's mourning cry, long and low and ancient as stone, rolled across the forest for hours. In the village, Kofi heard it. He was sharpening a knife by the fire when the sound reached him. His hand stopped moving. He set the knife down very slowly and did not pick it up again for the rest of that day. Suru came and sat beside him, not leaning against him as he usually did, but a careful distance away, watching him. Kent landed in the branches above and said, in a voice stripped of all its usual sharpness, "It has already begun. One might have thought, and perhaps you are thinking it now, child, that the death of 3 young elephants would have been enough. That Kofi would have looked at what had grown from the single seed he had planted and felt sufficient horror to stop the planting entirely." And indeed, something in Kofi did recoil. For 3 days after the elephant's mourning, he could not eat. He moved through the village like a man caught between sleep and waking, present in body but somewhere far and troubled in spirit. He avoided the forest completely. He could not bring himself to look toward the treeline. But the merchant returned. This time, he brought not only medicine and cloth. He brought a deed, a document bearing the stamp of a coastal trading house that promised Kofi rights to land near the coast, enough land to build a home and farm enough food to feed 10 families through drought and flood both. He described a new life. A life beyond the reach of failing rains. A life where Kofi's daughter would learn to read, where his mother could spend her final years in comfort, where Kofi himself would be recognized not as a village hunter but as a man of means and standing. He asked only for the paths. The migration routes of the animals through the forest, the hidden corridors that existed between the dense vegetation, the ancient trails worn into the earth by 10,000 years of hooves and paws. These paths were invisible to outsiders. Only Kofi knew them. The animals had shown them to him in trust, walking them beside him on moonlit nights, saying, "These are the veins of the land. Travel them when you must, and travel them gently." Kofi asked for 2 days to consider. He spent those 2 days talking to no one. Not his wife. Not the elders. Not Suru, who stayed close but did not intrude. He sat for a long time at the base of a great irako tree at the forest's edge, a tree he had climbed as a boy, a tree where the animals had first spoken to him in complete sentences, where the language between species had opened to him as a door swung wide on a warm morning. On the second evening, he told the merchant yes. And when he finished speaking, a bird he had never heard before began to cry somewhere deep in the canopy, a single, unceasing note, shapeless with loss. After the second betrayal, the forest changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, not in the way of storms and floods that arrive with obvious announcement. It changed the way grief changes a face, slowly, in the texture beneath the surface, in a quality of light that diminishes before you can name the moment it began to go. The animals still spoke. They always speak, they have not stopped speaking for a single day since the first dawn of the world. But they began, now, to fall silent when Kofi approached. Where before the vervet monkeys had called casual greetings as he passed beneath them, now they watched him from the canopy with a new quality in their small, mobile faces, something that was not fear, for fear empties a face. This was something fuller. A kind of watchful sadness. A recognition of change. The impala moved away when they heard his footsteps. Not running, not in panic, but walking, with deliberate distance, the way one moves from a fire that has grown too hot. Old Adwoa, the elephant matriarch, had not spoken to Kofi since the day of her mourning. When their paths crossed at the river one morning, an accidental encounter, she stood and looked at him for a long, wordless time. Her eyes were extraordinary things, deep and dark and amber-brown, holding centuries of memory. She looked at him. Then she turned, slowly, and walked into the trees without a word. That silence from old Adwoa was the worst thing Kofi had experienced in all his years. Worse than the drought. Worse than his mother's pain. It sat inside his chest like an ember that would not go out and would not, quite, ignite into something that could be dealt with. Kent the parrot avoided his hut entirely. The familiar figure of the bird on the rooftop had been part of the morning landscape of Kofi's life since childhood, and now the branch was empty, and the silence where the parrot's commentary had always lived felt obscene. Only Suru remained. Faithful, silent, conflicted Suru, who had been born between worlds and who loved Kofi with a completeness that could not be revoked by betrayal, who slept at his feet still, but who had stopped meeting his eyes. Even the insects seemed different in those days. Even the night sounds had lost some quality of fullness. As if the forest were breathing through a wound. The owl sees what others do not. This is not merely about eyesight, though the owl's eyes are remarkable things, built to pull truth from darkness. It is about the owl's nature. The owl watches without judgment and without emotion, which is the only way to see clearly. What others feel, the owl records. What others argue, the owl simply watches until the truth of it becomes undeniable. The owl of the northern forest, a great, silver-gray creature of enormous wingspan who was very old and had no name that any human had ever learned, had been watching Kofi for weeks. Had seen the map drawn in the dust. Had witnessed the second betrayal at the Irako tree. Had observed with those vast, still eyes as the hunting parties from the coast moved through the forest on the paths Kofi had drawn for them, and as the animals who had used those paths for generations now found their routes patrolled by men with iron weapons. The owl called the council. In the deep forest, on the night of the new moon, when darkness was its most complete, when no human eye could penetrate the tree-line, the animals gathered in the clearing beside the great ironwood grove. This was an old gathering place, older than any living creature present could remember. The air there smelled of ancient bark and deep earth and something else, a solemnity, a gravitational weight of many gatherings having happened in the same place over centuries. They came from everywhere. From the rivers and the treetops and the deep grass. The lion arrived last, as leaders do, and the clearing fell into complete stillness when he entered it. Even the insects paused, as if the world itself was holding breath. The owl spoke first. It did not editorialize. It did not emote. It simply told what it had seen, with the flat, precise authority of a creature whose only function in that moment was truth. When the owl finished, the clearing was silent for a long time. Then the tortoise, who had said nothing, cleared his throat, a slow, leathery sound, and said, "We must be careful. We must be certain. What we decide tonight, we cannot undo." The tortoise spoke first in the debate, because the tortoise always speaks first in matters of great weight. He has carried his home on his back since the beginning of time and knows better than any other creature the burden of a decision that cannot be put down. We have been betrayed before, the tortoise said, moving his ancient head slowly side to side as he spoke, his voice a careful, unhurried thing. Men have broken faith before, and we have endured. Before we act in a way that cannot be undone, let us consider, is Kofi the cause, or is Kofi a symptom of a cause larger than himself? Poverty is a kind of hunger. And hunger makes the hands reach for things they would not touch if full. The parrot, Kent, ruffled his feathers from his branch and responded with a sharpness that cut through the clearing like a blade. 3 young elephants lie in the ground. The migration paths are now known to men who carry iron fire. Whatever the reason for what Kofi did, the result is the same, whether the reason is poverty, ambition, or cowardice. The forest is not safe for us now. And it will not be safe until we change the terms of our relationship with humans entirely. The dog, Suru, present at the council for the first and only time in his life, invited because of his unique position between worlds, said nothing for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something that the clearing could feel but not name. Kofi is not all humans, he said. And not all humans are Kofi. The lion raised his great head. No, he said. Not all humans are Kofi. But all humans carry within them the capacity to become Kofi when the price is right. We have seen it before, in smaller ways, and excused it. We have warned and forgiven and trusted again. And every time we trusted again, the wound was larger than the last. Old Adwoa, who had been still as stone throughout the debate, spoke now in a voice so low that the ground vibrated slightly. The gift was given to all humans, not to good humans only. We cannot give it only to the worthy, because we cannot know who the worthy are until after they have shown us. And by then, we have already paid. The owl said nothing. The owl had already said everything. The clearing was silent again. Then the lion stood fully to his feet. An act that in any other context would have scattered the gathering in all directions, and every animal present understood that the debate was finished and the decision had arrived. The lion spoke. And when the lion speaks in the council of animals, it is not with the speed of a decision made in anger. It is with the weight of something that has been carried a long time and must, now, be put to rest. We did not give this gift to humanity, the lion said, his voice low and measured, filling the clearing the way a river fills a dry channel, completely, without haste, without gaps. The gift was there when the world began. It was the nature of things that all creatures shared one tongue. But we have been its custodians in this age. We have maintained it. We have honored it. We have fed it with our trust. And we can withdraw our portion of it. He paused. The clearing breathed. I am not punishing Kofi alone, the lion continued. Kofi is a man, and men will always be men, built of hunger and love and fear in equal measure, capable of beauty and of betrayal in the same hands, sometimes on the same day. I do not hate Kofi. But I understand now that what we have given is too great and too easily destroyed. One man's greed is enough to break it. One man's choice can poison what took 10,000 years to build. Suru, the lion said, turning his great head toward the dog with something that was almost gentleness. You asked us to spare all humans because Kofi is not all humans. And you are right. But we cannot maintain the gift only for the worthy, as the elephant has said. We cannot see inside each human heart before we speak. So we must speak to none of them. We must let the language go. Suru made a sound that was not quite a whimper and not quite a word. He lowered his head onto his paws and was still. From this night forward, the lion declared, and his voice carried the formal, irrevocable cadence of a judgment being sealed into the fabric of the world, we will still speak among ourselves. We will keep our language, our counsel, our songs, our warnings, all of it, intact and alive. But the bridge between our speech and human understanding will be closed. They will hear our sounds. They will not understand our words. And this will remain so for as long as the world stands. No animal in the clearing dissented. Not even the tortoise. Not even Suru, who loved Kofi still. Because they all knew, in the ancient, bone-deep way that animals know things, that it was right. What happened next in that clearing, the animals have never told fully to any living creature outside the circle. The ritual they performed that night belongs to the deepest roots of the world. Older than any single species, older than the forest that surrounded it, and some things are not meant to be carried in language, for language was precisely what was being changed. But this much is known, passed through the generations in whispered animal stories. The owl flew to the very center of the clearing and began to circle, slowly, at first, then faster, its great wings making a sound like the turning of the world on its axis. The other birds joined it in the sky, layer upon layer of circling, until the gap in the canopy above was a whirling crown of wings. The elephant and the other large animals stood at the clearing's edge and began to hum, not a melodic hum, but a deep subsonic resonance that entered the earth and moved through the roots of every tree in every direction, spreading outward like a ripple from a stone dropped into still water. It moved through the soil. It moved through the dark channels of underground water. It radiated outward from that clearing through all the land, until it had reached every corner of the continent, and still it moved, through ocean floor and mountain root, until it had passed through the entire world. The tortoise walked a slow circle on the ground, 9 times, unhurried, as if he had all the time there was. When the ritual was complete, the night was absolutely quiet. Not the quiet of absence. The insect still sang, the frog still spoke, the night bird still called, but the quality of the sound had changed. A layer of it had been withdrawn, folded away, sealed into a register that human ears would still encounter but human minds would no longer be able to decode. It was done. And somewhere in the village, every human who was not sleeping felt it. A sudden, sourceless sense of loss, like a word you knew perfectly well a moment ago that has simply, without warning, vanished from your memory. Complete. Gone. As if it had never been there. Kofi felt it too. He woke from a shallow sleep, sat upright, and listened. The night was full of sound. But for the first time in his life, it was only sound. The meaning was gone. He strained for it, reaching with every instinct he possessed. Nothing returned. Only the beautiful, terrible, empty music of the world. The morning came slowly, as mornings do when the world has changed overnight. The sun rose with its usual thoroughness, painting the sky in stripes of rose and copper, burning the night mist from the river in long, trailing curtains of evaporating dew. The weaver birds began their construction in the acacias. The Hadida ibis cried from the streambed. The village roosters announced the light with their usual bragging confidence. It was an ordinary morning in every visible way. And it was not ordinary at all. Kofi sat outside his hut before anyone else in the village had woken. He had not slept again after the feeling had passed through him in the night, that sudden erasure, that clean and terrible withdrawal of understanding. He sat with his hands on his knees and he listened with his whole body to the world around him. The weaver birds were speaking. He could hear the urgency in their calls, the specific syntax of alarm versus greeting versus weather warning that he had always been able to distinguish as easily as he could distinguish his wife's voice from a stranger's. Now it was all simply birds. Beautiful, musical, completely opaque birds. Suru came and sat beside him. The dog was quiet, as he had been quiet for weeks. But there was something different now in his stillness. Not the careful distance of a creature watching a friend lose his way, but the tender, helpless proximity of a creature who has stayed through the loss and remains in the aftermath. Kofi looked at Suru for a long time. "Can you still understand them?" he asked quietly. Suru did not answer in words, for dogs in those days, and in ours, do not speak in words that humans can hear. But he held Kofi's gaze steadily and did not look away. And in that sustained, clear-eyed gaze, Kofi understood enough. The other villagers noticed the change throughout that day, each at their own moment, some early in the morning when they tried to greet a bird that had always greeted them back and received only song in return, some later when a familiar animal simply walked past without acknowledgement. By evening, the elders had gathered. They had no explanation for it. Not yet. The explanation would come to them across many years, piece by piece, from a dozen different sources, but the full truth would always lie just beyond their grasp, like a word heard through a wall. Kofi said nothing. He sat by the communal fire until it burned to embers, and he listened to the forest with the specific anguish of a man who knows exactly what he is no longer allowed to hear. Now the story arrives here. To this morning. To you. Somewhere this very day, a child is waking to the sound of birds. She is 5 years old, perhaps, or 7, young enough that the world still feels like it is telling her something, that the sound of the hadida and the weaver and the dove is on the verge of making sense, the way a word in a new language feels almost familiar before it clarifies into meaning. She listens hard. She tilts her head. The birds call and call and call. She goes to her grandmother, who is sitting outside in the early light, doing what grandmothers have always done in the morning, holding the warmth of the sun against old bones, watching the world with eyes that have seen enough of it to find it beautiful without needing anything from it. "Go-go," the child says. "What are the birds saying?" And the grandmother is quiet for a moment. Not because she doesn't have an answer, but because she has been waiting, her whole life, for someone to ask this question in the right way. With the right seriousness. With the right readiness. "Sit down," the grandmother says. "I will tell you." She tells the story the way you have just heard it, in full, without skipping the painful parts, without softening the character of Kofi into a villain too convenient to be true or too monstrous to be human. She tells it as the animals still tell it, she says, in their language, which we can no longer understand, but which has never changed and has never forgotten. When she finishes, the child is quiet. The birds are still calling. The child listens again, differently now, not trying to decode the words, but understanding what lies beneath them. A grief that is not resentment, a separation that is not hatred, a distance that was chosen because trust, once broken past a certain depth, cannot be rebuilt in the same form. Only remembered. "Will they ever speak to us again?" the child asks. The grandmother considers this the way the tortoise considered everything, carefully, slowly, without rushing toward the comfort of a reassuring answer. "They are speaking now," she says finally. "They have never stopped. Whether we will ever again be worthy of understanding them," she pauses, looks at the child, "that is not their question. That is ours. The birds call. The forest speaks. And the great, patient world waits for the answer. For this is the truth that Kofi's story leaves with us, passed from elder to child across all the generations that have walked this earth since that night of ritual in the ironwood clearing. That the animals still hold our language as a gift they have not destroyed, only withheld. That the trust is not dead but sleeping. That greed took from us something extraordinary, not as punishment, but as consequence, the way fire takes your hand if you hold it too long in the flame. Human greed destroyed one of the greatest gifts humanity ever possessed, the ability to understand the voices of animals. And the question that remains, hanging in the morning air like birdsong, is whether we will ever earn it back.